Hey guys, welcome to another FamiStudio tutorial. With the release of FamiStudio 3.0, there was a lot of core changes, especially in the way we edit note, the way tempo works, that kind of stuff. So the previous tutorial is already obsolete after 6 months. Just like last time, we're going to be remaking a song from scratch with no prior knowledge required. You don't need to know about the NAS, about chiptune, or about DAWs, that kind of stuff. The only thing you do need to know is what musical notes are and where they are on the piano. Unfortunately, I cannot teach you music theory. We're going to be remaking the same song as last time, so if you watch a previous tutorial, there's going to be a lot of repetition, so you might want to pass on that one. Just like last time, I have a little MIDI keyboard next to me, so sometimes if you hear a sound coming out of nowhere, that might just be me rehearsing on the keyboard. That being said, you do not need a MIDI keyboard to use FamiStudio. We're going to be using the mouse, we're going to be using the regular computer keyboard to enter notes, all kinds of different ways. The song we're going to be making is included in the demo songs, which is typically in program files, FamiStudio demo songs if you are on Windows, if you use the installer. If you are on macOS or Linux, it's probably going to be included in the demo songs folder that comes inside the zip file that you downloaded. It's a very mediocre, very average song. I'm not a composer. It's basically just an excuse for me to talk about a bunch of techniques that you should know. So it's not meant to be good in the first place. Also, it's just going to use a small fractions of the feature of FamiStudio. We're not going to be touching on expansion audio. We're not going to be using any arpeggio. We're barely going to be using any effects at all. Yeah, so we're also going to be making two versions of the song, as you can see at the top right here. The first version is going to be using samples for the drum, while the second version is going to be using just the noise channel. So it's going to sound a lot more like your traditional Mega Man kind of drum kit. Besides that, they're going to be identical. I wanted to cover both techniques because not every games on the NAS use samples. So let's listen to the song real quick. To play the song, you can simply press on the play button on the toolbar, or even better yet, you can press spacebar on the keyboard. All right, now let's listen to the second version really quick, just a part of it. So as you can see, and in this one, the drum is a lot more traditional. We can listen to just the drum by soloing a channel. To solo channel, we right-click on the little icon here. You can also mute the channel by left-clicking on the little icon. Let's listen to the noise channel. So as you can see, it's just a bunch of noise, but it does have this really retro quality to it, which I like. Let's listen to the one with samples. So as you can see, a lot more realistic. Before we get started, let's go over the UI real quick and talk about what we're looking at right now. The FMS file that we've opened, we call this a project, and a project contains one or more songs. In our case, there are two. And the currently selected song is going to be in bold. At the top here, we see the 5 channels that the NES supported, and the selected channel is going to be in bold. And on the right, we have all the instruments that are in our project. And again, the selected instrument is going to be in bold. So the rule is always going to be that the selected instrument is going to play on the selected channel when you press the piano. So if I go on the triangle, there you go. Very simple. A project can also contain samples. Here we have 2. We can listen to them by pressing the little play button. And we could have had arpeggios, but we're not going to cover that in this tutorial. At the top, we see all the patterns that are in the song. Patterns are little units that can be repeated one or more time. When you click on a pattern, you're going to see on the piano roll the content of this pattern. Inside the patterns, we have notes. Notes are colored by the instruments that they used. So this is kind of the general structure of a project. Let's give a name to the things that we're looking at. The top part is what I call the sequencer. So as I said, this is where you kind of define the high-level structure of your song, which pattern plays on which channel and when. At the bottom is obviously the piano roll, and you can always know what you're looking at by looking at this kind of gray rectangle at the top of the sequencer. So as I'm panning, you're going to see what part of the song you're actually looking at. So sometimes if you're lost, it's really helpful to look at that. On the right, this is the Project Explorer. This is where you have like the global things of your project. You're going to see all your song, your instrument, your samples, your arpeggio, that kind of stuff. This is also where you're going to be editing those samples and instruments. Finally, one last thing before we get started, let's talk about the control. Using FamiStudio is a lot like using a phone or tablet. Everything is done through the mouse. To zoom in and out, you simply rotate the mouse wheel. This is true for the piano roll. This is true for the sequencer. It's going to zoom where your cursor is. To pan, so to move left and right, up and down, you press the mouse wheel. Yes, that is also a button, and then you move. Same for the sequencer. In general, in FamiStudio, to add stuff, you simply click with the left button. This is also true for the sequencer at the top. If I click on an empty space, it's going to create a pattern. And to delete something, you can right-click with the mouse, and it's going to disappear. Same for notes. There you go. If you are on a laptop, you really want to enable trackpad controls. It's going to make your life a lot easier because on a trackpad, you obviously don't have a middle mouse button. You don't have a mouse wheel. So that's going to be super helpful. One last thing about the UI. Some people really like scroll bars. So as a FamiStudio 3.0, there are scroll bars. I personally don't care for them, so I'm going to remove them. But I know some people really like them. If you are on macOS and the keyboard does not work, please see the link in the description. A lot of people ask about that. It's a very simple fix. It's a permission thing. Also, let's talk about undo redo while we're at it. Undo redo is super solid in FamiStudio. Control Z to undo, Control Y to redo, or if you prefer, Control Shift Z to redo. Some people prefer that way. It's very solid. You can undo anything. You can even like delete an entire song and undo, and it's going to come back. So don't worry about losing anything. It's a very solid feature. Also, a very important thing is the top right area that I call the tooltip area. As you move the mouse in FamiStudio, you're going to see that FamiStudio is going to tell you everything you can do at this exact moment, depending on where the mouse is. So it's an incredible way to discover FamiStudio and all the features you don't even know exist. So pay attention to it. It's going to tell you about keyboard shortcuts, what happens if you click, what happens if you double click, what happens if you right click, all that kind of stuff. It's a great way to discover the app. Also, at the top right corner, there's the big question mark. There's some really good documentation in FamiStudio. So if you want to know about, you want to know about MIDI, just search MIDI, and you're gonna, you're gonna have some information about MIDI. Very useful. All right, enough talking. We're gonna press the new button, and we're gonna be remaking that song from scratch. Let's go. The first thing we're going to do in our song is create a very simple drum pattern. It's going to help us figure out the tempo, and it's going to be the foundation of our song. So I mentioned samples earlier. What does that mean? DPCM samples were very low quality samples that the NES supported. We can load samples in our project by clicking the little folder icon next to the DPCM samples section of the Project Explorer. There is a link in the description of this video to some assets that are needed to complete this tutorial. It's a zip file, and inside the zip file are going to be 2 DMC files. DMC files are very standard NES sample files that are used in the kind of NES chiptune community. You can also load WAV files so you can create your own sample, but that's not going to be covered in this tutorial. All right, so here I'm going to open the bass drum, and I'm going to open the snare. All right, so we got the sample loaded in our project. The second thing we need to do is we need to assign them to keys of the piano. There is a special instrument called a DPCM instrument that's always there. You cannot delete it. If you click on this little waveform, this is where we can assign samples to keys of the piano. We want to assign the kick drum to C2. There's a couple ways we can do that. We can click in the blank area next to C2, and it's going to ask us which sample we want to assign. So here I'm assigning the kick drum, the bass drum. A second way would be to simply take the sample and drag it to a key. So here I'm assigning the snare to D2. If you double click on a sample, you can change some additional properties like the pitch or make it loop. Or if you made a mistake, you can always drag a sample and move it around, and it's going to ask you if you want to transpose the notes. The reason why we have to assign these samples in kind of two-step is that the same sample can be assigned to multiple keys of the pianos, but that's more of an advanced concept. The first thing we're going to do in our song is create a new pattern on the DPCM channel by left-clicking. We can always rename a pattern by double-clicking on it. Here I'm going to call it verse 1, and color red is fine. And when we click on it, the piano roll is automatically going to go to this pattern and show us what's in there. Right now, there's nothing. All we see are a bunch of lines. Some are dashed, some are not, some are darker, some are lighter. I'm going to come back to what all of these things mean very, very soon. Let's try to enter some notes in the piano roll. The first thing we're going to do is make sure that snapping is enabled. To enable snapping, make sure the little magnet icon here is light. Snapping is going to allow us to be a little bit more clumsy, and it's going to snap our notes to the grid when we enter them. Very useful if you're clumsy like me. So to add notes, we simply click and we drag to set the duration. Here we're going to set the note at every beat. Beat are indicated at the top here, so 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. So here this is kind of like a 4/4 measure, if you will. And we entered C2 because this is where we assign our kick drum to be. Now if we want to listen to what we enter, we can simply press the space bar. By default, FamiStudio is going to play from where that kind of yellow vertical line is, which I call the seek bar. If you want to play from the beginning of the song, you can do shift space. Or if you want to play from the current pattern where that seek bar is, you can do control space, which happens to be the beginning of the song here, so it's the same thing. Before we get any further, we're going to change some project properties. The project properties are set by double-clicking on the section that says Untitled Unknown. These are kind of global project settings. This is where, for example, we would give a title to our project and enter the author. This is also where you would select your expansion audio. Some Famicom cartridges came with extra hardware that gave them more audio channel to create a richer, fuller sound. But here we're not going to cover that in this tutorial, but this is where you would select it. Also, this is where you would change your tempo mode. If you come from more of a FamiTracker background or you need compatibility with FamiTracker, this is where you would change the tempo mode. Also, if you're making a game that's targeting more Europe, this is where you would switch to PAL mode to edit your song. This is going to affect the BPM calculation in some ways, but we're not going to cover that for this tutorial. Oops, there's a typo. The same concept applies if I double click on a song. I'm going to see a bunch of properties. I can give the song a name. I can change its color if I want to. So the first parameter we're going to change is the song length. If I zoom out here, the length of the song is set in number of patterns. Right now it's 16, so it goes from 0 to 15. We only need 10. It's a rather short song, so we're going to do this, and now it goes from 0 to 9. In the song properties is also where we find the tempo settings. Here I'm going to go on a little bit of a technical discussion about tempo. Bear with me, it's only going to be a minute. I swear it's going to be useful. So at a BPM of 90, FamiStudio tells me that that is 10 frames per note. What does that mean? Well, a frame, because we are in NTSC mode, as we saw previously, means it's 1/60th of a second. So that means the screen on your TV is redrawn 60 times a second, but this is also where we get to change the sound. We can play a new note, we can change the volume, we can affect the pitch. So if we go back to the piano roll and look carefully, you're going to see that there are, this is what the little dash line represents. There are 10 of them inside a note, and notes are separated by solid gray lines. Now, if we go back to our project properties, we're going to see that there are 4 of those notes in a beat, and that checks out. We can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the beats are also notated 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. And we also see that there are 16 notes in the pattern, and indeed there are. Another way to think of this is kind of like a bar or a measure of 4/4, for which we can go as small as 1/16th of a note, or we can go finer if we disable snapping and start drawing at a frame level. So yeah, that's what all these lines represent, and between patterns there's a very thick black line separating patterns. Here we want a tempo of 150. Choose this. And FamiStudio here tells me that this is going to be 6 frames per note. And it makes sense because if we have less frames, that means we wait less time. That means the tempo is faster. This is kind of the idea behind this. I'm going to press OK. And I'm just going to select the first option. This is the default one. This is what we want. And if we look very carefully now, we only have 6 of those frames inside a note. And this is what we want. The second thing I'm going to change is that I personally prefer to have 2 bars or 2 measures in a pattern. I find 1 bar to be way too short. It ends up creating a lot of very small patterns, so I'm going to change this. I'm simply going to double up the number of notes per pattern. And here you see the pattern just got a lot longer, but I do need to draw the extra notes here. Ooh. All right. Now we have the right tempo, we have the right number of notes inside a pattern, and you could look at this as 2 bars or 2 measures of 4/4. Now we can start entering our real drum pattern. So we're going to make sure we select our DPCM instrument here, and we're just going to set the snapping precision to 2, because this is what we need for the drum. To change the snapping precision, simply rotate the mouse wheel on the little magnet here. Here I'm just going to do it with the mouse, no need to break out the MIDI keyboard, it's very simple. So I'm just going to click with the mouse and just enter the notes. Here you can resize notes if you move near the edge of the notes. There we go. So here we have our little drum pattern for the verse. We would want to repeat this 4 times. So to move patterns around in the sequencer, you simply click and drag very easily. What we can do also is create an instance of a pattern. An instance is a copy that is kind of linked to the original. It's essentially the same pattern. So as you move the pattern, you can hold Control, and it's going to show you a little link icon. This means you're going to be creating an instance. Here, because they are the same pattern, if I modify one, you can see the note also moves on the other one as well. And in general, if 2 patterns have the same color and the same name on the same channel, they are the same. So I can rename this one, change its color, and both of them have changed. This is how you know they are an instance. So here I'm going to be creating 4 instances. All right, so that's the entire drum part for the verse. Now that we have our drum beat, we're going to be working on the bass. For the bass, we're going to use a triangle channel. And we're also going to be using that instrument 1 that was created for us at the beginning. We're not going to be worrying about instruments right now. We're just going to be entering the notes, and we'll make the song sound good at the end. Here I'm just going to create a new pattern on the triangle channel, and I'm going to call it verse 1. And I'm just going to add a bunch of 8 notes on A sharp. Let's enable snapping, and yeah. Let's see how that sounds. You see, we can't really hear the separations between the notes. What's happening here is that the triangle channel is simply generating a triangle waveform, and since the pitch and volumes don't really change, we don't hear any separations between the notes. To fix this, we're going to be inserting a little bit of silence between each note, 1 frame to be specific. So here I'm going to be disabling snapping, and I'm going to resize this note by 1 frame. A faster way to do this is you can resize multiple notes by selecting them. So I'm going to create a selection, and to do this I'm going to be right-clicking in the background and dragging. Here I want to highlight these 3 notes here because I already did the first one, and again resize them by 1 frame. Now let's give this a listen. See, now we can clearly hear the attack of each note. That's great. Now because I'm extremely lazy, we're going to be duplicating these notes 3 times. It's just an excuse to show you various ways of copying stuff in FamiStudio. I'm going to show you 3 ways. They all start the exact same way. Here I'm going to enable snapping. I'm going to be selecting these 4 notes that I created here. Again, to create a selection, right-click in the background and drag. The first way I'm going to be using copy and paste. So I copy here, Control-C, and I move the selection here and I do Control-V, Control-V, and Control-V. Easy. I'm going to be undoing this to show you a second way. Again, I start by making a selection, copy, I move. Here I'm going to be using a special paste, which you trigger by doing Control-Shift-V. There's a bunch of options here, but most interestingly for us, there's a repeat count, so we can say 3 times. And here we have 3 times the paste. The last option I'm going to show you, whoops, I did a little bit too much, is you start by selecting again. And when you have a selection, you can always move stuff around. You can drag the notes, move them. But if you hold Control, it's actually going to duplicate the selection. And even when you're doing this, you could even transpose at the same time. But here we don't need to do this. So here I created 3 copies, so I have a full 2 bars of bass notes. Now let's listen to our song. I get the feeling that the bassist and the drummer aren't really working together. The bass notes are way too regular. Usually a bassist and a drummer will try to sync. The bassist will try to sync to the kick drum of the drummer. So how do we do this? The kick drum is on the DPCM channel, but the bass is on the triangle channel. We can't see both at the same time. It's kind of a little bit messy. To help us, we're going to be using this option called Force Display, which is this little eye icon here that's on the channel. What this does is that it's going to show you this channel even when it's not the selected one. It's going to appear kind of semi-transparent here. Here I'm editing the bass channel, but I can still see the drum, so this is going to be very useful. Here I'm just going to be deleting and resizing a couple of notes just to make it feel like these two guys are kind of working together. There you go, that sounds a lot more natural. A faster way to switch between channel is to use the F keys on the keyboard. So for example, F1, F2, F3, F4, F5. So here I'm toggling between triangle and DPCM. And you can do also Control 3 and Control 5 to kind of toggle that force display that we've been talking about here. Much like the drum, we want to repeat this pattern 4 times. But unlike the drums, we can't play the same note over and over. This is a musical instrument. To save time, we're going to duplicate this pattern 3 more times and then transpose the notes. So we already saw that holding Control will create an instance of that pattern. Holding Control and Shift will create a completely independent copy of that pattern. You can see here, it gets a different name and it gets a different color. It's a completely different pattern, even though it was copied from that original one. So now I can freely edit any of those and it's not going to affect verse 1. To quickly select an entire pattern, you can double right-click on the header in the piano roll. There's a couple ways we can go about transposing these notes. The first one would be to simply drag and drop. So here I can lower these down to G#2. And another way would be to use the arrow keys on the keyboard. So if I press down, I can move those to F#. Yep, that's it. You can also do Control up and Control down to move by an entire octave instead of a semitone. You can also move things left and right using the arrow keys. Pressing right is going to move by 1 frame. Control right is going to move by an entire note. Reset that. And oops, let me fix that right real quick. All right, that's better. All right, that's our entire base for the verse. Now we can start working on the melody. For the melody, we're going to be using the square 1 channel. So as usual, we're going to be creating a new pattern, name it verse 1. Since the melody is a little bit more complex, we're going to be using the recording mode. Recording mode is enabled by pressing the big record button in the toolbar or simply pressing enter. When you enable this mode, a few things are going to turn red. These are the things you should be paying attention to when recording. For example, on the piano, you're going to see a bunch of letters here. These are the keys on your QWERTY keyboard that corresponds to these keys of the piano. So you have access to about 2 octaves and a half, but you can move that range up and down using page up and page down. And by the way, I keep saying QWERTY keyboard, and I'm going to be saying for the rest of the tutorial. But if you live in France or in Germany and you have a AZERTY or Quartz keyboard, you can configure the keys here in the settings. Here, since I have a MIDI keyboard, this is what I'm going to be using, but otherwise everything is the same. Another thing that turned red once we enable recording mode is the little magnet here. What that's going to tell FamiStudio is the length of the note to record. So 2 in our case means 1/8 note. So let's say I press the first key. Here you see it recorded in 1/8 note of A sharp. If I don't want to record anything else here, I can just press tab to move 1 step forward. If I make a mistake, I can always go back by pressing backspace. And that's kind of how it works. I'm going to be quiet while I record the note. I need to focus a little bit. All right. So one thing I'm going to fix here, I'm going to select everything and I'm going to stretch the notes that I kind of skip over. So I want these notes to be longer and cover everything. That last one is a bit too long. All right. Another thing I'm going to do is that FamiStudio created patterns for me. I'm going to rename them with my proper naming convention. Oops, I made a mistake. Pattern verse 4. Now let's give this a listen. Cool. As you can see at the beginning, we kind of have the same problem we had with the bass. We cannot hear the separation between these notes. For now, we're not going to do anything about this. This problem is going to solve itself when we start using real instruments. Now we want to do the harmony for the melody. For the harmony, we're going to be using square 2. And to save us some time, we're going to simply duplicate the entire melody, transpose it, and simply fix up the mistakes. There are two ways to make a selection in the sequencer at the top. The first way is very similar to the piano roll. You can kind of right-click in the header or in the background in general to kind of create a selection like this. But the problem with that is it kind of selects all the pattern on all the channels, so that's not what we want. You can create a square selection by first selecting a pattern and then shift-clicking somewhere else. And as you can see, it kind of creates like a rectangular selection. And this is what we're going to use. We're going to select these 4 guys. And like we did before, we're going to drag, but we're going to hold Control and Shift to create a completely independent copy. Here, as you can see, they have different colors, but the names were preserved. If we go on the piano roll, we're going to try to transpose these notes to something that can create somewhat of an harmony. Here, I'm just going to select everything. Oops. And I'm just going to be moving it lower. Let me disable the input. Much nicer. There you go. Actually, also one nice thing is that I could be using force display here to kind of see the harmony I'm creating on both channels at the same time. But here, since I'm creating a song that I already know, I don't really need to, but this is probably good practice here. Now I'm just going to fix a few notes that are completely out of key. It makes no sense here. Let's see if I can spot them all. All right, let's see if I made any mistakes. Let's give this a listen. Cool, we did it. Now we are ready to extend the drum and bass all the way to the end of the song. So I'm going to be creating 2 new patterns called chorus 1, chorus 2. And for the chorus, I want the drum to kind of take a backseat and chill, so I'm just going to be entering very regular quarter notes. Let me zoom in for you. And also here, I want kind of an alternating pattern, like let me just copy and paste. That's it. I'm going to be duplicating this one more time, and then I'll reuse the verse pattern at the end. Yeah, believe it or not, the drum is pretty much done for the entire song. Now for the bass, same deal. I'm going to be creating 2 new patterns. The bass here, I want to be playing like very regular notes. Let's start with, yeah, these kind of very regular 8 notes. Whoops, wrong instrument. By the way, to quickly toggle snapping, you simply do Shift S. So you can quickly, whoops, here I want to disable it. There you go. And I'm going to be copying this a few times. Here, I want to go to G sharp, and I'm pretty sure I can reuse part of the verse here. Yep, that should work. All right, and finally, I'm going to be reusing this a couple more times. Let's see how that sounds. All right, there we go. We're going to come back later and punch up the bass a little bit, but that's essentially the entire song. Now we're ready to extend the melody all the way to the end. So I'm just going to create a couple more patterns real quick. And I'm also going to create a couple more called turnaround 1 and 2. The turnaround is the little part of music that's going to connect the end of the song back to the beginning. So here, I'm going to duplicate these two. I'm just going to enter the note using the mouse here. It's quite simple what we need to do here. And for the turnaround, oops, let me zoom in for you. All right, let's give this a listen. All right, here at the beginning of the chorus, I want to smoothly glide from this C sharp to this G sharp. And the way it's done is using a slide note in FamiStudio. To create a slide note, you simply hold S and click on a note and drag up or down. So here I'm just going to connect the C sharp all the way to the G sharp, and it's going to smoothly vary the pitch. There you go. Now for the second channel during the chorus, I want some kind of fast-moving arpeggio. So since there's a lot of small notes, I'm going to be using the recording mode here. All right, so let me enable recording mode. And let me try not to make too many mistakes. Oops. Here my MIDI keyboard doesn't go quite as high as I want, so I need to move this one octave higher. And I'm just going to rename those chorus 1. Oops, I don't think you could see that. Chorus 2. And let me duplicate this all the way to the end. And let's listen. Perfect. So believe it or not, we have a full first pass on the entire song. The next task is going to be trying to make it sound better using like proper instruments. What do we mean by instruments here? Obviously, the NES cannot sound like a piano or a guitar. What we mean by instrument is simply changing some very basic parameter over time, like the shape of the waveform, the volume, the pitch, that kind of stuff. I'm going to show you a couple ways of doing this. The first one, which you should avoid, and a second, better way. I'm first going to be trying to change some parameters using the FX panel. The FX track or FX panel is expanded by clicking the little triangle here at the top left of the piano roll. The FX track can be used, for example, to change the volume of a track. Here I'm just going to solo square one and just change a bunch of volume values. The default volume and the maximum volume is 15. So let's listen to this. So as you can see here, the volume is slowly decreasing. So that's kind of one way to affect the volume. To delete an effect, you can simply right-click. Or to delete multiple effects, you can simply select a bunch of notes and do what's called a special delete, which you can do by doing Control-Shift-Delete. And here you can select exactly what you want to delete. So here I would like to delete just the volume effect. Boom, and they're gone. Another thing we could affect would be the pitch. So here I'm just going to slowly kind of change the pitch, see how it sounds. So here we kind of, we're kind of slowly lowering the pitch. As you can see, like doing this for every single note would be extremely tedious. This is why the FX panel or FX track should be reserved for these kind of one-off or these kind of things you want to do that aren't really systematic, that aren't repeating at every single note. A better, more systematic way of doing this would be to use instrument envelopes. Instruments envelopes are these four little icons that are next to each instrument. They are respectively the duty cycle, volume, pitch, and arpeggio envelopes. These represent very basic parameters that you can change over time whenever that instrument is playing a note. So here, if I click on the volume envelope, you can see that right now it just has a single value of 15, which means this instrument is basically blasting at full volume all the time. Here, what I can do is that I can resize this envelope and change the parameter over time. Here, I can make the volume go down over time. So how it works is that every frame is going to move one column to the right. Every 60th of a second, it's going to be moving one column over to the right, and the volume is going to go down. And I can do more fancy stuff. Like, for example, I can set a loop point, which is going to make it loop in a particular section. So whenever it's going to hit that 23, it's going to jump back to 12, and it's going to be stuck in that looping part. See, it's kind of doing like a tremolo kind of thing. Even better, I can extend that and add what's called a release point. What it means is that as long as I hold the piano key, it's going to be stuck in that looping section, and whenever I release the piano key, it's going to jump to that point and slowly decay. See? So by using these things, we can make much better instruments. Another envelope we could use is the pitch envelope. Here I'm just going to delete whatever we had done on the volume envelope by right-clicking. It's going to reset it to the 15 default value. Here I click on the pitch envelope. Again, same thing, I'm just going to extend it, and just for fun, I'm just going to draw something like this, see what happens. Here, as you can see, we can make the pitch kind of go down slowly over time. All right, so this was kind of just an example. I'm just going to delete this, and we're going to try to create a better instrument. Here, I'm just going to call this lead verse 1. It's going to be our main instrument for the verse. And let's try to create some kind of a, oops, I hope you were seeing that. Let's try to create a proper volume envelope. So the default value of 15 is extremely loud, so I usually go about halfway. Here I'm just going to draw something like this, something that kind of slowly goes down. Something that never quite goes to 0, something like this, and I'm going to make it loop and release like this. So. As you can see, very, very simple. I'm also going to use the pitch envelope here. I'm going to click on the little tuning fork here. And here I'm going to extend it a lot. I want to create some kind of vibrato effect that kicks in after about half a second. So here that would be about 30 frames. So after about 30 frames, I'm just going to draw something that kind of be reminiscent of a sine wave. Something like this. So here as I play, see, it creates this very pleasant kind of vibrato sound that kicks in after half a second. So short notes won't have it, but very long notes in our song are going to have it definitely. Another thing you can affect is the duty cycle, which is represented by this little square waveform here. I'm going to click on it. The duty cycle affects the shape of the waveform. So 0 is going to sound very nasal. 1's going to sound less nasal, I guess. 2 is that very traditional 50-50 square wave. And 3 sounds exactly like 1, so I'm not going to even bother kind of playing it. One thing we can do with the duty cycle is kind of make it change over time again. Here I'm just going to have it go from 1 to 0 just for one frame, and it's going to sound like an attack. See? It kind of sounds like a keyboard of some kind. So that's pretty cool. We're going to duplicate this instrument and just change a few parameters. So I'm going to create lead verse 2 for the kind of the backing harmonies. And I'm going to copy the 3 envelopes we just created. To copy envelopes, you just grab them and copy them over to the second instrument, and it's going to ask you, do you want to copy? And you just say yes. For the second instrument, the only thing I'm going to change, I'm going to do the opposite for the duty cycle. I'm going to go from 0 to 1, just to create some variety. Now we've created these kind of super cool instruments, but our song is still using that boring instrument 1. How can we replace the instruments? It's actually quite easy. You just select this whole verse here, yeah, all the way up to verse 4. Here I'm just going to drag and drop the lead verse 1, and as you can see, the color just changed. And same for the second one. I'm just going to select from verse 4 to the beginning and use that instrument. Now there's one last thing we need to do. If you remember, we just added like a release point to our volume envelope. When I played the piano, this release point was triggered by me physically releasing the piano keys. But how do we do it in a song? We need to tell FamiStudio when to release that note. How that's done is by using what's called release note or release points. And those are created by, by shift clicking on a note. So I can shift click. And here, as you can see, the note is kind of becoming thinner. And this is FamiStudio's way of representing the note being released. And here I'm just going to sprinkle a few of those. Whenever I feel like a note is getting kind of long, I'm just going to add one of those. There it goes. It doesn't need to be perfect. All right. And I'm just going to listen to this in isolation, just so you can hear the sound decay. Just pay attention when that release point is going to be hit. See how it fades out nicely? That's exactly what we want in a release point. So we can maybe listen to our verse now. Pretty cool. Also, if you notice, that actually fixed the problem of us not being able to hear the separation between those notes. Now, because we are varying the volume and the pitch, we kind of can hear every single note being triggered. Now we're going to create a lead instrument for the chorus part. I'm going to create a very simple instrument. I'm going to call it lead chorus. It's going to be a duty cycle of 2. I'm going to create a very simple volume envelope that slightly goes up. And I'm going to be reusing that little pitch envelope, the little tremolo that I really like, vibrato, sorry. That sounds good. So just like before, I'm going to select everything from the chorus all the way to the end of the song on square one, and I'm going to be replacing it with our new instrument. I'm going to play the chorus with just the square one channel, and I want you to pay attention at what's happening around the slide note here. I'm going to play it again. Can you hear some kind of popping, some kind of pulsation happening around these notes? What's happening here is that the second C sharp and the G sharp are both triggering a new note, which in turn restarts the volume envelope from the beginning, which means we can hear the attack of both of these notes. We don't want that. We want something that goes very smoothly from the C sharp to the G sharp. The solution here is to disable the attack on these notes. In FamiStudio, the attack is represented by a little black rectangle at the beginning of every note, and it's there by default. But we can hold A and click on the note to disable the attack. We can toggle it actually, so we can bring it back if we want. Now we're going to hear the result. Much better, hey? Also, because the envelopes don't restart, the vibrato actually kicks in a little bit earlier, which is quite nice. All right, let's keep replacing instruments and make our song sound better. Now we're going to tackle these kind of fast arpeggios we created earlier. For this part, I'd like to have some kind of echo. But what do we mean by echo? A channel can only make a single sound at a time, but fortunately we can trick our ears and fake an echo by playing a very low volume version of the previous note. Let me show you what I mean. First of all, we're going to create a new instrument. We're going to call it bleep. This one's going to have a duty cycle of 2, and it's going to have a very simple volume, something that just slowly decreases over time. Something like this. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And just like before, I'm going to be selecting everything. Whoops. Selecting everything and replacing it with this instrument. All right. So to create this echo, I'm going to show you not 1, not 2, but 3 ways of doing this echo. The first version is going to use 2 instruments. The second version is going to use a single instrument and a volume track. And the third version is going to be using a single instrument and no effects at all. For the first technique, I'm going to create a new instrument that I'm going to call bleep echo. And it's going to be also a duty cycle of 2. But it's going to have a low volume, just a volume of 3. So here, I'm going to disable note snapping because I need to be very careful, very accurate where I position the notes. What I'm going to do is that at the end of every note, I'm going to insert for 2 frames with that new instrument the sound of the previous note. So let me try to show you what I mean. Here I'm inserted a G sharp because there's a G sharp here, and I'm just going to keep going like this. All right, I'm not going to do the entire chorus, but you'll get the idea soon enough. See? Kind of sound like an echo, right? And especially when the whole song is playing, it's a lot better. All right, now I'm going to undo everything. Actually, no, I'm going to simply replace. I'm going to reset the instrument. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to simply replace with the regular bleep instrument. So now we no longer at that kind of low volume. But what I'm going to do here is simply lower the volume here using the volume track. So I'm just going to go between 6 and 15 like this. So you can see what I'm doing here is that for each of those little echo notes, I'm simply lowering the volume like this. And I could be even more efficient and use copy and paste, which I'm going to do actually. Here I'm going to be using a special paste, Control-Shift-V, and I'm just going to be pasting the volume, and I'm going to be repeating it a few times, maybe, I don't know, 5 times. Yeah, that's a bit too much, but who cares? See, it creates a very similar effect, but here we only use one instrument. So, you know, you choose the technique you want. And for the last technique I'm going to show you, we're actually going to delete bleep echo. We don't need it anymore. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to add a release to the instrument we created earlier, the bleep instrument. It's going to loop on that 4, and the release part is going to release it down to 4 and 3. Earlier, we talked about release notes. We talked about disabling the attack. How do these two things interact? If I add a release point on that note and I disable the attack on subsequent notes, you can see that this note remains released. That means the envelopes are not going to restart until it finds another note with an attack. We can use this to our advantage to create this kind of echo. So here I'm just going to undo. So here if I just add a release point, disable the attack, release point, disable the attack, release point, disable the attack, and so on. You can see that this little part that's going to play the echo is going to have a lower volume because that's how we design our volume envelope. While this is arguably tedious to do, it does use a single instrument and it is actually quite visual. You can see the note becoming smaller. So yeah, this is the third technique. I'm probably going to fast forward this part because it's very tedious to click. So I'm going to shut up here. All right, let's see how I did. As you can see, the moral of the story is that there's always multiple ways to achieve the same result in FamiStudio. Just pick the one you prefer. The choice is yours. At this point, we replaced pretty much every instrument. So the old instrument one that was created at the very beginning is just used by the bass. We might as well rename it to bass. The triangle channel does not have any volume or duty cycle, so it's very typical to see a plain instrument for the bass. Now we have the noise channel that is completely unused, so we might as well use it to complement the drum. So I was thinking to create some kind of hi-hat. All right. The noise channel is very simple. It only supports having volume and arpeggio envelopes. We're going to talk about arpeggio envelopes in a second, but right now let me just create a very simple volume envelope. Something that just goes down like this. Yeah. Oops. The noise channel doesn't really play real musical note. It just has 16 different sounds and they keep repeating across the entire piano. So as you can see, there's no real science to it. I suggest you try to find a sound that you like somewhere in there and just use it. Now the arpeggio envelope is very, very simple. It's basically the number of semitones you want to go up or down as the instrument is playing. So for example, if I just create something like this and I make it loop and I play it on square one, it's going to be essentially like a major chord. So it's quickly playing a C, an E, and a G. But for the noise channel, we can kind of use this to create some kind of percussion sound. And I really encourage you here to look at what other games are doing. It's a little bit hard to figure out on your own. Let me just start here. Oops. All right, here I'm just going to create a bunch of patterns. And then we'll enter the note. So, oops, first one. I'm going to duplicate that 4 times. Chorus 1, 1. Yeah, that looks good. And here I'm just going to add a little bit of hi-hat whenever the snare is playing. I'm going to snap to 8 notes. So this is our snare here, so I'm just adding a couple hi-hats whenever that snare is hitting. And here, during that part, I'm just gonna match the kick drum. All right, let's listen to just the drum now. All right, arguably it's not the greatest, but I mean, at least we're doing something with the noise channel. Another thing I want to do is that I want to punch up the bass a little bit. Right now it keeps playing the same notes over and over. So I think we could get something a little bit more interesting if you move a few notes around. By the way, you can totally edit the song while it's playing. It's really not a problem. Here, I'm just going to connect with a slide note here. Let's give this a listen. All right, that's pretty good. We are almost done. The last thing I want to do is add a little bit of an intro to the song. To do this, we're going to extend the song duration by 1 pattern, so we have some room to work. We're going to set this to 11 now. And here I'm going to right-click in the header to select the entire song, and I'm going to move everything 1 slot to the right. This way we made ourselves a little bit of room to create an intro. Here I'm going to create a new pattern, call it intro 1. And I'm just going to add a few notes just to get us in the song. Which note? There we go. We can do the same thing for the drum. Something like this. Cool. Now the problem is that our song starts with a whole bunch of silence. How do we fix this? The solution is to use what's called a custom pattern setting. Custom pattern settings are accessed by double-clicking anywhere in the header here. So here we want to shorten pattern 0, so we can double-click here. Here we can enable custom pattern, and FamiStudio will let us change a bunch of parameters. These are the same settings we had in the song, but they will be custom to that column here, that 0 column. Here we don't want to change the tempo, but this is how you would do it if you want to, you know, slow down or, you know, increase the tempo for just a specific part of our song. Here we just want less notes. We actually want just 6 of them. So this is what I'm going to do. And here it worked. Our pattern is shorter, but we kind of lost our notes. The problem is that our notes were all the way at the end. And now what we see is the beginning. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to undo what we just did. We're going to move our notes all the way to the beginning. Like this. Here I'm using the keyboard, which is very slow. Might as well use the mouse. It's a lot better. And again, we're going to change this to 6. And now we have a nice intro. Now let's see what happens if we reach the end of the song. You see now it loops back to the intro, but the second time around, we probably don't want to hear the intro. It's a little bit jarring. To fix this, we need to move the loop point. The loop point is this little gray arrow at the top here. We can move it around by holding L and clicking. We can position it anywhere, and if we click at the same place, it's going to actually disappear. So this means we're creating a non-looping song. Here we're just going to set it to 1 because this is where we want to jump back to. This is our verse. And while we're at it, we might as well copy those little notes that we added at the beginning and put them at the end. Yeah, all right, let's give this a listen. Perfect. All right, believe it or not, we have our first version of the song. Good job. Now what we're going to do is quickly create a second version of the song, and we're going to replace the drum by a more traditional NES drum that does not use any sample. There's no built-in way of duplicating a song in FamiStudio, but you'll see it's actually very easy. We're just going to create a new song. We're going to call it Tutorial Song Without Samples or something like this. And we're just going to set the same settings that we had in the other song. If you remember, we were at a BPM of 150. Yeah, so these were our settings. Yeah, it doesn't matter. I'm going to go in the first song that we have. I'm going to select all the patterns by right-clicking at the top. I'm going to do copy, Control-C. I'm going to come back here and I'm going to paste. And we have a new song. I'm just going to move the loop point here. FamiStudio does not do that for you. The first thing we're going to do is delete every pattern on the noise channel because we're going to be redoing it all. In the interest of saving time, since we have to create 3 new instruments, but there's really nothing new to learn here, I've included them in the tutorial asset. You can merge instruments from another FamiStudio project by clicking the little folder icon here, and it's called Noise Drum Instruments. Again, you can find the tutorial assets in the link in the description. Here I'm going to load all instruments, and I'm going to be creating new patterns. First one, I'm going to duplicate that 4 times. And I'm going to be entering the notes. Here, we're going to be deleting the DPCM channel really soon, but now we can still use it as a good reference for the drum part we need to do. So here, yeah. I'm going to be inserting our new kick drum, which is called noise bass drum, every time the old kick drum used to hit. So you can see they are pretty much the same. Same for the snare. I'm going to be adding it as well. Now let's see how that sounds. I've muted the DPCM channel. As you can see, it's not bad, but I think we can make it a little bit more dynamic to compensate for the lack on the low end. Here I'm just going to insert a few little hi-hat here and there, just to punch it up a bit. Let's see how that sounds. All right, that's a lot better. Now we're going to create a couple more patterns for the chorus. Going to duplicate them all the way to the end. And during the chorus here, we're just going to chill a little bit, maybe hit the snare and the cymbal at every beat. And some cymbals as well. And here again, very similar. We're just going to mimic whatever was happening on the DPCM channel. G sharp, we want. And just like we did on the verse, we're just going to insert a little bit of those cymbals every now and then, just to make it a little bit more dynamic. All right, that sounds pretty good to me. Here I'm just going to delete everything on the DPCM channel. And believe it or not, we are done with this new version of the song. Now, what should we do with our songs? I guess the next logical step is to export them to like a bunch of formats. The export dialog is in the toolbar here. As you can see, there's a bunch of formats you can export to. I'm not going to cover all of them. WAV and MP3, I guess we don't need to talk about that one. Video is actually a pretty cool one. It will render an MP4 video that looks like this. I think it's a super cool visualization if you want to share on social media, something like this. Another thing you may want to do is maybe run it on actual hardware. If you have an NES or a Famicom with an EverDrive or an FDS stick. Here I'm just going to show you on an emulator, but it does work well on actual hardware. There you go. Otherwise, MIDI, if you need to send this to another app, I'm not going to cover this, nor am I going to cover all the last ones. They're fairly technical, so if you want to send this to FamiTracker or that kind of stuff. All right, good job if you made it all the way to the end. Hopefully this is just the beginning of a long chiptune journey. Please leave your questions and comment in the comment section below. I will be maintaining a kind of a pinned comment with corrections and answers to common questions. Better yet, you can join us on Discord. We have a super cool community that's growing. People are very nice in there. See you guys.